Welcome to the last episode of Havers as we know it. We spent the past 16 weeks speaking to entrepreneurs, restaurateurs, public figures, and other inspiring people to get to the bottom of the question, what does it mean to have it all, and how can we get there? And while I loved having these conversations about success and business with people I truly admire, the show got away from its original purpose, which was to celebrate and give a voice to the food community. And because of this, my producer Andy and I decided to reset and rebrand the show starting this week. We'll still talk to many of the same types of guests, but instead of being a show meant to inspire budding entrepreneurs, we want to become a show that entertains and uplifts the food community. A show you want to listen to if you need dinner or nightlife plans for the weekend. One that doesn't just tell you what the best places are, but teaches you how to identify them for yourself and how to be a better diner once you sit down. But before that, we'll revisit a clip from each episode so far, and while we still don't have an answer for our question, hopefully through these clips we can begin to piece together a story of what it means to have it all. In our first ever episode, Jun Sun, aka Kimchi Poppy, someone who has become a close friend, gives us insight into why he felt he needed to become an entrepreneur. This psychological need is a pattern we observed with many of our guests: freedom.
I've only had a 9 to 5 for about 9 months, which was in between the sneaker store and Kimchi Poppy Kitchen.
And are you happy that you got out of that?
Oh, hell yeah. I hated that shit.
Yeah.
I wanted to die every day.
Really?
Yeah.
What about it?
I was just miserable because it's just like you have to work like super extra. Like you don't get paid if you're working extra, and like the boss was very toxic. It was far. The commute was far. And also, you always had like 3 or 4 bosses telling you the same shit. Like, all right, this fucking guy told me already. But then they're just like, I don't know. I just didn't like that whole. I didn't like getting told what to do. Not to say like I'm the smartest person in the room, but I just like wanted to be my own boss, and 4 people telling me what to do was getting kind of like annoying, and I felt like I was smarter than these other individuals, and they were just in their positions because of whatever their resume or their tenure, you know.
Right.
So yeah, but I did learn a lot from that. It made me appreciate like being your own boss. There's freedom in that, you know, even though it's a 24-hour thing, but at least at the end of the day, you don't have to answer to anyone.
Next, we spoke to Peter Wynn, executive chef at Les Madeleine, one of my favorite new restaurants in Boston. This clip is unrelated to having it all, quite the opposite in fact, but this is the type of conversation I think we need to have. This is about the pay disparity between the front of house and the people actually cooking your food.
I feel like, I want to support like fair wages for cooks and whatnot.
Of course, yeah.
If you go around to restaurants nowadays, you see in the check at the end it says a kitchen service fee.
Yep.
That's what chef owners are trying to do for the kitchen guys. Because they do so much and they need more.
Yeah.
Whereas like these front of house guys making like $300 a night.
Yeah.
It's just like
mind blowing. It's pretty insane, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mind blowing. For sure.
How big is the disparity between like the front of house and back of house? It's like if you're at a restaurant where a server is making $300 a night, what can a cook expect to make in the same night?
Way less. Like a day, I would say like
a third, like around 100?
With tax, we talking about tax, I would say like $80-$90 a day.
Crazy, yeah.
You know what I mean? It's tough, so I can see why a lot of people choose the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people like what they do and they cook and they don't want to leave.
Right.
But they need advice at the end. I was like, fuck this shit, man. Like I don't make nothing, I don't do nothing.
Yeah,
I don't get the satisfaction of cooking and creating good shit that people appreciate, but I'm not being appreciated. You know what I mean?
Next, Eric Papachristos, CEO of A Street Hospitality, one of Boston's top restaurant groups, gave what I think is some of the best entrepreneurship advice I've heard to date. Don't just take the leap, make the gap as small as possible, and turn it into a step. It wasn't like you took the leap in a sense, because as you mentioned earlier, you did the moonlighting thing for a while. Was that your way of kind of hedging the bet and mitigating the risk of everybody saying just don't do it? But you were like, I really just want to, so let me just dip my toes in. So that's how you did it, right?
That's exactly it. I talk about that a lot. And like if I lecture, if I talk in front of people or a panel, I always talk about that, mitigating the risk.
Right.
As an entrepreneur, you're going to have to go through this, jump over this abyss, the abyss of becoming, the risk of an entrepreneur. The other side is your company and success. And where you're standing is sort of, where your current state of, you got a job or things are steady. And so how big is that gap? Some people just take a fucking running sprint blindfolded and they just try to go to the other side, and most of them fail. And again, this doesn't apply necessarily just to restaurants. It applies to any industry, become an entrepreneur. So for me, it's always like, bridge that gap, make that gap as tight as you can. And for me, it was like, I have an income that comes in from the law firm. I want to be, I have the income now that comes in from the nightclub, I want to do more, but I don't want to lose this income and just sort of like risk it all. And still, even to this day, the way that we, build our company, it's, it's a lot of risk mitigation. I haven't closed any restaurants. I know I will someday. I talk about that. I'm nervous as fuck about it. And it's actually what keeps me up at night. But again, it's always like that risk mitigation.
Another theme we heard a lot was how people start their own businesses for freedom, but in doing so often end up working for longer than they would ever work in a 9-to-5. Almost every guest we spoke to worked 100-hour weeks consistently for some time in the beginning. In this episode, Ron and Jess of Blackfin Collective talk about how that was a painful but necessary phase in their journey.
100-hour work weeks and a lot of learning, I'd say. But
so why so many hours? Like at that time, was it just you guys and like maybe a couple other people? Like why were you?
Yeah, a lot of it was just a combination of arrogance and ignorance. I think
we were also like a pretty relatively small community. Like UConn's in the middle of like bumblefuck nowhere. And like getting distributors out there, like big distributors or distributors with like a lot of variety, especially Asian fare, wasn't quite common. So we actually had to go and pick up a lot of the ingredients ourselves.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
I
So it's a
literally
combination of that.
I like negotiated with the owner of a grocery store. I'd be like, listen, if I come back every week, I order this much, can you set it aside for me? And,
Yeah.
and that was like a 45-minute drive one way. So that would mean 9 a.m., go drop her off, and then I'm going to drive for 2 hours to pick up everything.
It's like to the nearest like large city.
Hartford, Connecticut.
Okay.
So, even then it's not that large.
I
So.
love how you're gonna say you don't think Hartford's large. We don't think Hartford's large.
It's the largest city in
Connecticut.
near Connecticut.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then come back, and the thing is never organized. Couldn't predict anything. So probably went like 4 or 5 times a week. Hella inefficient.
Wow.
Yeah.
But I think for us it was just like, young energy survival mode and kind of addressing the problem in front of us.
Yeah.
But
What we didn't solve with like being smarter was being solved with work harder.
For sure.
Another main topic of the podcast was love and relationships, and many guests have expressed the difficulty of finding or building a relationship, especially when trying to get their business off the ground. If you have a stable relationship, you can maintain it while building a business, but if not, it's extremely hard to try to build both at the same time, due to the high time and mental commitment required for either. In this episode, Michael Gander of Cloud and Spirits, one of my favorite bars but previously an incredible high-end Asian restaurant, tells an illustrative story.
Actually, I met a girl kind of at the same time I was starting the Cloud build out. And then, we ended up kind of breaking up because of the amount of hours, and because she was in education, so she'd be working like 7 to 3, and that would literally 3 o'clock would be when I would go in, and then I would get back home, midnight, and she's asleep. So we would get like a Monday night, but like, what the hell is a Monday night? Like one Saturday night's worth like 10 Mondays nights, So I would always, have to cancel like a dinner plan or a date on a Friday or Saturday because some shit would be exploding at the restaurant. And that just kind of takes a toll. And then, they kind of lose hope and they just like learned hopelessness. Like, oh, he's probably going to cancel or,
oh man.
And then it just deteriorates. And then ultimately at one point I was like, I have to make a decision. And I couldn't really make a decision. And then eventually so much inactiveness or like not making a decision, the decision kind of made itself. And, we went our separate ways. And
We talk a lot about the how, but sometimes we want to talk about the why. Rand Wan, legendary bartender and restaurateur, puts it really well. Often, it's not for you, but the people you care about, in this case, his family, that motivated him to get to where he is.
So that really motivated me because, I was able to kind of upgrade my parents' business from I don't want to say cliche, typical mom and pop Asian restaurant where you have soda cans on the corner, one wall, the other walls, God knows what boxes and fortune cookies and stuff like that, where we're really able to kind of elevate it and make it into something that's more of a destination. So we started Baldwin Bar, and once I started Baldwin Bar, I just started competing in cocktail competitions. I'm like, fuck it, what's going to happen? Suddenly I was just winning every competition I could to the point where I represented United States in 2 global competitions.
Hell yeah.
And not just that, being an Asian bartender too, it's like it's unheard of where, the cocktail community tends to be very dominant by Caucasians.
Yeah.
So it was
A
very
lot of
interesting.
mustached white
Mustache,
people with,
suspenders,
Yeah. Patchworks,
patchworks,
tattoos.
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I got tattoos, but
Yeah,
nothing
the
crazy
Asian
like
style,
that.
yeah.
Like, I got to be on brand, with the Asian
Exactly. Yeah,
tattoos.
very
So.
fire.
So yeah, I feel like that really motivated me because I was able to elevate my parents' business
Mhm.
through that, and haven't looked back since.
Mm.
So I kind of converted all our family's restaurants into cocktail bars /
Destination cocktail
Chinese
bars.
restaurants,
Yeah.
But it's not your typical mom and pop restaurants. It's definitely a little more gentrified. The spice, the heat, everything's definitely tamed down a little bit because obviously, it's gentrified. We can't serve like piping mala spicy dishes to everyone, or
Mhm.
they're just gonna crap themselves.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty much what motivates me, elevating my parents' brand, and that kind of took it to the next level level for me. So
Nice.
Part of this show was an exploration of how to know what to do with your life. In undoubtedly the headiest episode, Joe Vincula, brand designer for many of Boston's best restaurants, gives us an inspiring take on identifying your true calling.
Like that to me is like what you call like being in alignment or with your
Right.
highest self. Like when you feel great, to me that is your GPS's way. Like so imagine emotions are like the scale of like a keyboard.
Yeah.
The better you feel, and I don't want to make this like a contest of who feels best.
Yeah.
Because that's not how it works. But to me, there's a GPS system built inside of you. So when you feel great, that is your inner being telling you that you are in alignment with your highest self.
Mhm.
And when you don't feel great, that is also indicative of your inner being and you basically having a disagreeing perspective.
Yeah.
So it's not bad. It's just saying you're over here and I'm over here.
Yep.
How do we get back over here? And usually it's just massaging yourself. Maybe you're like mentally, not
Right. Well, you can do
you
both.
could massage yourself to get back into the alignment, but
yeah.
just like self-soothing, or a lot of times it's just focusing on the tiny details. You got to zoom out.
Back to dating. Another pattern that emerged from conversations with guests, especially females, is that as their status increased, whether in wealth or reputation, it became harder to find men. This was somewhat counterintuitive because you'd think having more resources would also translate to more dating options. But from what we heard, it seems like this is only true for men, who are able to attract many more women as they build their success. But for women, it seems success only restricts their dating pool even further. Here's a story from Tiffany Chan, WBZ's hottest anchor.
95, I can't believe I'm even saying this,
Yeah.
but 95% of the guys that I go on a date with, within the first week, it's the question of, why are you going out with me? What do you like about me? You could be talking to so many other people.
Really?
And I'm just like, why do I trigger that in people?
I think it goes back to the thing I was saying earlier, where because of like your image, it's like people would assume, and probably rightfully so, that you have a lot of options and that you could really like be with anyone.
But how come guys can't be like, let me be the top option? It's always like a
lot of guys
defeatist.
are bottoms.
It's
Yeah.
always it always comes in defeatist, and then for me, and then
Turn
it
off,
makes
right?
me be like, why do I like
Yeah.
you? You know? No, because when you date, you're mirroring the other person.
Right.
You're trying to think like, what can I add to their life, and what can you know what I mean, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Like when I look at a guy, I'm like, what can I add to his life? And I feel like maybe from the other perspective, when a guy looks at what they can provide in my life, I don't know.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
I see what you're
I
saying.
think that might be where the why me comes from.
Yeah.
Here's a man's perspective on the same thing from Kevin Liu of Matsunori and Armani, aka Forking with Armani, Boston's cutest gay Asian and food blogger.
We were talking to a girl yesterday who self-described type A personality. So very ambitious, a lot of stuff going on in her life. And she finds that, she's having trouble with a lot of guys because they get insecure about she's doing so much, she's so successful. What are your thoughts on the type A woman?
I think they can only date up, right? It's more like pride, if anything. But them dating up means that they're also going for a guy who doesn't actually care about their success.
What's success though? I've always wanted to ask
That's
that to
true.
people. It's like,
Yeah.
what is success? Like, I feel like people get so wrapped up in that success is about the job title, about some kind of getting some kind of notoriety or something. And I'm just like, is that though? Is it? So that's a good question. It's like when you're talking about dating up, it's like, what does dating up mean?
Mm-hmm.
Are we now gonna set people in
Yeah.
classify people?
But if you think about it, right? Like if you say, somewhat successful,
Mhm.
just vaguely, somewhat
Yeah.
successful type A personality female, is she really gonna date someone who might be like a barista at like a coffee shop?
I would say yes. Like,
Even if the guy's really happy, has
Yeah.
a very
As
happy
a
with his
person,
family,
yeah.
right? But like realistically, do you think that's something that would happen?
I do.
I disagree
Why?
because
wanna hear
I
your
think
thoughts.
he cannot keep up with her quality of life and lifestyle.
And I find that sad because, like, quality of lifestyle could be different. You could be different and still make things work. And the reason why I say this is, like, I find there's more value when you grow together. When you do things together, whether or not someone's at a different level, you uplift each other when you find the right person, and you get to like a level where
But
it's
you
like you're
generally, when
comfortable.
you're already at a
Yeah.
certain level, I don't
Mhm.
think I don't see you like dating down. Does that make sense?
This next clip comes from one of my favorite food bloggers, Paige Harding, aka Dining Boston. This
One
next
that's
clip
inspired
comes
me
from
ever
one of
since
my
I
favorite
started
food
because of
bloggers,
not only her
Paige
work
Harding,
ethic, but her
aka
real love
Dining
for
Boston.
food.
When I posted this conversation on socials, it sparked much more debate than we thought. The question of who should pay on the first date. People seemed really passionate about their stance on this topic one way or the other, and the discourse that ensued was one of the things that inspired us to pivot this podcast into a more customer-focused target audience.
The men there in Italy would always get the door for you. Like they're gonna pay the bill no matter what. They're gonna make sure that you feel like the woman. Where like here, you might get the guy that's like, so we splitting?
Right.
Like
yeah,
that
yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
happen there. Like they think that's just like, what the hell's wrong with that guy?
Oh yeah, yeah. You might
But-
be called liberal or gay or whatever for something like that. For
I had a
moves
friend
like
go on a
that.
date 2 weeks ago, and the guy's like, so I wanted to talk about like your comfort levels on splitting checks. It was a first date, and she was like,
The guy said that just like straight off the bat.
Yes.
Wow.
And she was like, yeah, I'm actually not okay with it.
yeah.
And he was like, oh, if we went somewhere else, would you get the drinks?
Oh man.
And she was like, I'm like that. I'm sorry.
That's interesting. So this has actually come up quite frequently as a topic here. Like,
Okay.
what are your thoughts on it?
On American guys?
No, on the splitting checks thing. We'll get to the American guys after.
Splitting checks.
Yeah.
Coming from like a very successful businesswoman
Mhm.
myself, I don't value money like that.
Mhm.
Like where like it's just a matter of like, why would we split it? Like I got it or you got it.
Right, right.
Like if I want to get it, I should be allowed to get it. It should if you're in a relationship, it should be a partnership. It's
Yeah,
not like,
yeah.
hey, you're doing all of this.
I think in a relationship it's different, but the first date, right?
Oh
Like
no,
your
if he's
friend.
not paying, I'm not going to a second date.
Yeah, it's just I think it's very strange because pretty much all the women have said that.
Yeah.
I don't understand why men are why would someone ask that question if
So you could have. I feel like sometimes the guys that are asking are actually like the pushover-esque type that are really like sweet guys that just like maybe they're the ones that are getting screwed over,
Mm.
and maybe they've paid for a lot already. So now they're like
Oh.
they just feel like they're being used.
Sure.
Maybe like that's
Yeah.
me being just the empath I
Mhm.
am, and like being like maybe these guys have tried to do the right thing, and these girls just don't like them, or now they just feel like no one likes them for anything other than the fact that they pay a bill.
Interesting. Yeah.
In our conversation with Executive Chef of Trade, one of Boston's best Mediterranean restaurants, Alavi gives young chefs advice that I think really applies to any early entrepreneur and even people who don't really know what to do with their lives.
It's important to find where you belong, but it's also important to not be complacent. I think I really grew when I learned something, everything I could, then went to the next place. Didn't look for money necessarily. I took like salary cuts sometimes, which it hurt me financially.
Right.
But like, there's been times where I took a half a salary. I was like, give me half, I'll just come.
Yeah.
I went there, worked for a year, learned everything they had to, then jumped on to the next place.
Mm.
Sometimes hopping around looks bad on your resume, where people are like, you're just hopping around. You know,
Yeah.
you cannot settle down. But it also has a benefit where you learn everything you can.
Mhm.
You go through different chefs. You absorb like a sponge almost.
Mhm.
You absorb everything you can, different cuisine, different styles. Then when you're like a little bit older, your late 20s, early 30s, then you can be like, okay, this is my repertoire.
Mhm.
These are the group of people I see
Right.
myself with. That's where I'm gonna settle. But you already have all those skills in your books.
State Representative Trom Nguyen also gives similar advice for the youth.
For people who don't know what they really want to do with their lives, like what would you say to pay attention to try to figure that out for yourself? Like, and what other tips might you have?
I want to say take risks or experiment. And I tell this to young people all the time because I went through this. I have always been risk averse. So I've always done things that I knew I was good at, but that made me miss out on so many things that I could have done. Who knows? Like, could have been something else, but I did, I was very good at school. So I concentrated on that. I was good at tennis. So I concentrated on that, but I wanted to play volleyball, but I was like, it's funny, earlier you were like, oh, you're tall. I'm like, I'm 5'3", I'm not that tall.
I think you just have tall energy.
I do. The people do say that. What I lack in height, I make up in my tone and my volume. But so I didn't do a lot of things because I didn't want to fail, right? But I think for young people, it's just as important to know what you're good at as well as what you're not good at, because you never know what you could do unless you try it. And I give this example all the time that I never wanted to run for office in the first place, but I made that leap of faith, and it has brought me to where I am today. And I wouldn't have been able to do that without, taking that risk, taking that plunge, and risking potentially losing, because I'm sure you've seen that I represent Andover, North Andover, Tewksbury, and Boxford, predominantly white community. I'm the first person of color to ever represent that community. So when I ran, they said I had a very low percentage of winning, but I did it anyway, thinking I was going to lose, but then I won.
Then we sat down with Becca Barr, owner of Colette Wine Bistro, a beautiful French restaurant in Cambridge. This story about the hiccups involved with throwing a lavish launch party to me illustrates the tenacity, grit, and do whatever it takes mentality required to be a successful entrepreneur.
How'd you choose who to invite? Like, what was the strategy behind the actual party?
So I had actually started hiring kind of event planners before I'd even had a sale. I'm a very optimistic person, and with this first business, I was way too optimistic. But I was a great business leader of people I was seeing. So I hired all these women who spoke like 8 different languages across them. A lot of them had master's degrees, and I just wanted them to be like hosts for these events, like just great, intelligent people on site for all these events. So I'd hired all of them. And one of them was helping me plan the party, and she had personal connections with Bijou. I had connections for someone to donate the fabric that we used to decorate the room. I had a girlfriend who her boyfriend was like the chef that did all the catering for the event. I'd met the DJ like 3 years before and was able to reach out to him through the general manager of Lucky Strike, who knew, it was just a lot of connections helped bring the event together. And so it was a lot of those connections that were then invited to the launch party. And then friends of friends. Just wanted to make it big and splashy and get a lot of great content.
Right.
Yeah.
And how'd that feel then after, I guess the day after, did you feel like that was a success? Were you like, oh, I shouldn't have spent 30,000?
Yeah. So I mentioned I covered the room in all those rugs.
Yeah.
I rolled them all back up. I rented a moving van, and I spent 8 hours the next day returning every single one of those rugs because I couldn't afford them.
Yeah. The old 90-day return policy.
Yep. Yeah. They were all really great because for the Moroccan party, I told everyone to take off their shoes. I knew they would be kept in immaculate condition. So I drove all around Massachusetts, New Hampshire, returning these rugs with a moving van by myself.
Finally, we spoke with Andy and Win, founders of Vietnamese community and lifestyle brand Ham Chơi Life. While they're early in their entrepreneurial journey, we could still see from their mindset that just like the show, their brand is about figuring out what it means to live a good life and helping their community have it all.
As we mentioned, you are founders of a lifestyle brand, essentially. Is that how you describe Ham Chơi Life, or how would you describe it?
Ham Chơi Life is definitely it's a lifestyle brand. It's supposed to give people a community, right? We want people to have a community of like-minded individuals who really are about living your best life, living your life. Because when you're a kid, right, you don't really think about it as much. You're kind of just having a really good time, enjoying things. You don't see how hard people are working, your parents are working, or the behind the scenes stuff. But when you kind of graduate or just become an adult, you get a job. But that job, you don't realize damn, you have that job now for as long as you live, basically. We're like, okay, this can't be all there is to life. It's gotta be something else. So honestly, the founders, we were like, hey, let's get together. Let's figure it out. What is a life worth living?
For those who stuck with us for this journey, thank you so much for all your feedback along the way. Huge thank you to all the guests and the MVP of this endeavor, my producer and engineer, Andy. Both of us knew very little about podcasting before this, but we learned so much, and we're excited to use what we learned to bring you the rebirth version of our show starting next week. Thank you again, and as a wise man once said, you got it all.